Day 199 to 1:49 p.m. Manila Bay Forest, Manila Bay area. After Mark's group ate a simple lunch, just some instant cup noodles with bottled mineral water, they proceeded to continue their journey. As said, their lunch was simple, at least to Mark's group. If some regular survivor of this world saw them, they might die of envy. There was no need to mention having food. For many people still alive, just getting something into their stomach already was an extremely tedious task. Dangerous, most must even say. Mark's group did not eat that much this lunch, however. They finished their food as fast as possible and departed. Although it could not be called waste, they still used up half of the day staying at the same place. Although the shelter was not exactly a problem, they still wanted to at least find a good place to stay when the night came. Shelter for the night was the most priority for them. While they were looking for the traces of the people of Bay City, there was no guarantee that Mark's group would find them today. After all, who knows if the people of Bay City did really go to Corregidor Island? Well, Mark wished that they did so. That way, Mark and his group would not waste more effort and time blindly finding people. At this moment, the floating vessel, they now decided to call the Minicube, was hovering over the new land over Manila Bay. Why the sudden name? Apparently, the floating vessel was not really given a name by the creator. It was due to the fact that it was a part of the laboratory, the cube, despite being an emergency vessel at the same time. While eating lunch, Mark's group was discussing this. They had not really thought about it in the past, but now, the floating vessel being nameless was becoming a bit of a nuisance during talks. Since they were using the floating vessel as transport, it was better to give it a name and make it easier to indicate. And due to that, it was given the name, the Minicube, despite its large size. It was because of the fact that it was also shaped like a cube and was a small part of the cube. The Minicube hovered carefully over the trees. It was not flying high up the sky at this moment as they were following the trail that could possibly lead them to the people of Bay City. Since the view of the outside inside, the Minicube, was limited, Mark was currently sitting outside the platform in front of the vessel's door. Here, he could see things outside clearly. More importantly, the trail they were supposed to follow. What they needed to follow was the trail of shorter grass. The grass had been affected by the people of Bay City when they passed by. However, no matter how enhanced their eyes might be as mutators and non-human beings, it was still hard to differentiate the grass from above. There was no way to determine something's height just by looking at the top, after all. That was why they were carefully traversing the way, making sure that they would not lose track of the trail and become lost. From where Mark sat, it was not only the trail that he could see. From time to time, he could see wandering, infected, either stray individuals to a rather large hordes. Once Mark spotted one, Mark would enter the door and hide inside the Minicube. This way, there was no chance of attracting unwanted attention from the infected, and end up spending more time fighting the infected. It was the same for Mechids, and worse, Mechids were more curious about the Minicube than the infected. The infected would not pay much attention as long as they did not see Mark. The Mechids, on the other hand, would follow for a bit before giving up. There was even one time that a Mechid, capable of flight using some sort of rocket booster, flew up and landed on the Minicube's roof. Mark had no choice but to deal with the annoying robot. Of course, not by destroying it but catching it instead. While watching the sceneries below, Mark managed to not only follow the trail but observe the infected and the Mechids below. By what it looked like, the infected and the Mechids were not working together. The infected did not seem interested in the Mechids. On the other hand, the Mechids had the tendency to follow and observe the infected. Nonetheless, there did not seem to be direct interactions between them. Even during the fight in the ruins of Bay City, while it was true that Mark's group fought a horde of Mechids and infected, the two groups were not together as one. The horde of infected was together, well, most of them. The Mechids also performed as a different group, and different to the infected. All the Mechids in that area were grouped up. That was why Mark's group was able to deal with the threat more efficiently, because Mark and Chimetris did not have to worry about stray Mechids joining the fight of the girls. This observation, however, even more, showed how dangerous the Mechids were. These alien robots could focus their whole group on a single target and even choose their target. This could become both an advantage and disadvantage depending on the situation. Mark noticed something below. He immediately tapped on his magic ring, sending a message to May, who was inside. The minicube stopped from moving and hovered in place. Mark then jumped off the platform, turning into a surge of black mist to mitigate the impact of the fall. Mark appeared below, trampling the overgrown grass with his feet. His attention was on something left in the middle of the trail. It was covered with overgrown grass and vines. Without hesitation, Mark called forth the wind manipulation mental crystal. Like yesterday, he created blades of wind, immediately cutting the grass and vines over the large debris. There, the true appearance of the debris was revealed, and to say, it was something familiar to Mark. The modified Humvee, Mark murmured. Back in Bay City, when Mark began the modifications of their vehicles, he saw something like this at the parking area of the workshop. It was a modified Humvee that was refitted with the new metal that Bay City created with their research. Mark was not sure whether this vehicle was the same one or another, but there was no doubt that it was from Bay City. And it was left here, in the middle of the trail for some reason. Observing the abandoned vehicle, Mark noticed that 3 of the wheels were missing, leaving only one which was obviously flat. It could be the reason why it was abandoned. The military might have lacked replacements for the flattened wheel and decided to salvage everything they could from the vehicle before they abandoned it. Mark also noticed that the hood was not locked and opened it. There was no engine either. It looked like his guess was really close. Still, it was a pity. Mark was clear that the military highly valued their refitted vehicle. It was obvious when Mark's eyes fell on the refitted Humvee back in Bay City, and he was declined before he could ask. Well, it was not like he wanted one back then. Let's see. Mark tapped his spatial ring, asserting the remaining space inside. Looks like there's enough. And without hesitation, Mark immediately stored the remains of the refitted Humvee into his ring. Even if it could not be repaired anymore, it could be scrapped for the new metal, which could be useful in many ways. Mark returned to the minicube and told everyone what he found. They then continued following the trail. And as they continued further, they could not help but notice the irregular directions that the trail went to. At some point, it went inland, while at some, they went to the coastal direction. But looking at the terrain, the irregular directions became understandable. What the people of Bay City traveled on was not a cleared road. There were places packed with trees. Unless they intended to cut the trees to make a way through, they would not be able to travel straight. Cutting the trees was impossible in their circumstance, however. They would need heavy equipment to cut and uproot trees of several hundreds of years old. Worse parts of the trail were rocky areas where large rocks protruding from the ground blocked the way. Mark's group could see the difficulties of the road that the people of Bay City took. In some areas, Mark found traces of battle. There were even times where 1 or more graves were erected in the locations they possibly took a rest. Worse, Mark found dead bodies. Some were eaten to the bone, while others were left rotting unfinished. By the looks of it, the ones eaten and left with only bones were the work of the infected. As for the rotting ones, it might be either Mechids or evolved animals. Mark's group continued to follow the trail, stopping at times when Mark found something. At this time, Mark noticed that even though the people of Bay City traveled inland several times, they tried to move near the coast as much as possible. It was very likely that the reason was that Corregidor was an island. It would save them a lot of time traveling if they followed the coast of Manila Bay or what was left of the bay. Soon, Mark's group found themselves already closing into the province of Bataan. How could they tell? Since they were flying above the trees, they could see the terrain better. And to the east, they could see a mountain. Mark had his phone out and was looking at the map he downloaded when the outbreak started. If he was right, the mountain they were seeing was Mount Mariveles. The time Mark's group took to reach this point sure was short. The sun even barely set, and the sky was still bright. On the other hand, the people of Bay City might have taken more than a day or two to traverse the same trail. It was obvious since there were a few camping sites left by them along the way. Reaching the province of Baton, specifically the municipality of Mariveles, Mark found more traces of civilization. Unlike the land that now covered Manila Bay, where there was nothing but trees and rocks, the municipality of Mariveles had more ruins of houses and many other structures. And there, Mark's group reached the part of the trail that answered the question of where the people of Bay City went to. As the trail went south, it was, now without a doubt, the military settlement in Corregidor Island. There was no need to follow the trail any longer, they just needed to fly straight south. Without needing to follow the trail as carefully as possible, the journey became faster. Mark was sure that they would reach Corregidor Island in just a little past sunset. But, of course, Mark had no plan on going there straight and showing the minicube to the people there. As such, Mark took out the photokinesis mental crystal. With this, he covered the minicube with optical camouflage entirely. It would not last long since covering a large thing with optical camouflage was draining the energy of the crystal rapidly. However, it was more than enough to last until nighttime. At night, it would be fine even if the minicube was exposed, as the darkness of the night sky could hide it. Mark told Shemetris and Ilya to fly higher. They could not risk anyone or anything to detect them even with the optical camouflage. It would also allow them to see further and observe the Corregidor Island from afar. But as they arrived near the island just a few minutes past sunset, everyone was in for an unexpected surprise. "What the hell is this?" Mark voiced out, and others had the same question. Corregidor was not an island anymore, as the new land created a bridge towards it, but that was not the issue. It was the settlement on the island. Well, that was if it was still a settlement. A few layers of several meter-tall stone walls, structures standing tall, and even slums outside its gates. It was not a settlement, it was a gigantic fortress city. Day 199 to 7:21 p.m. Barangay Cabcaban, Municipality of Mariveles, Province of Baton. The Corregidor Island. It was an island that was part of the province of Cavite, located at the entrance of Manila Bay. It was in the northwest of Ternate, Cavite, and directly south of Mariveles, Baton. Looking from the sky, the entirety of this small 5-square-kilometer island had a similar shape to a tadpole. But as strange as its land formation had been, this island had a great significance to Philippine history, making it a national shrine. Long since before, the island with its rocky landscape was considered a natural fortress. The Spanish administration fortified this island during the 18th century. Afterward, it was used by both U.S. and Philippine soldiers to fight the overwhelming numbers of Japanese soldiers during World War II. All those days were of the past. Corregidor Island had long been a popular destination for tourists, both local and foreign. Well, of course, it was all before the apocalypse. When the apocalypse began, the iconic island was chosen as one of the locations of military settlements built all over the country. And the settlement planned here was second among the largest. The Bay City settlement only became the largest due to the place already built with structures and only needing walls for security. The Corregidor Island, on the other hand, needed more things to construct. The already existing buildings made for tourists would not be enough for the expected number of refugees. Considering that it was an island, the military would need to transport large amounts of resources to build the settlement. This would limit their construction efforts even more. Due to these reasons, even if the military settlement planned in Corregidor Island succeeded, it would not be that large of a place. Furthermore, the fusion of dimensions and the arrival of the second wave caused so much destruction that everything that humanity built collapsed. Even the military settlement in Corregidor Island would not withstand such a calamity and should have been destroyed. That was what it should have been. Right now, Mark's group stood at the Minicube's flight deck, staring at the scene in front of them. The current Corregidor Island did not look like a giant tadpole anymore and was more or less an irregular oval. Now, it was not only that the island doubled in size, but the Caballo Island slightly southeast became connected to it. But the change in the size of the island was expected. Every piece of land in the entire Earth more or less doubled in size, reducing the area covered by the sea. What Mark and the others did not expect was the fortress existing on the supposedly ruined island settlement. And it was not just a small and simple fortress. It was an entire fortress city. Although the structures inside the walls were clearly on a small scale, the several meters tall and a few meter wide wall was more than enough to call it a fortress. Furthermore, the area surrounded by the walls was likely more than a kilometer square. Small size for a city, but a city nonetheless. There were also the slums outside the walls near its gates. The size of the slums would not lose to the fortress city at all. Who knows how many people were gathered just within the slums filled with scrap-made buildings. Another surprising thing was that the fortress city clearly had working electricity, considering the spotlights atop the walls and the lights in many of the buildings inside. The scene in front of them was totally absurd, even by their non-human standards. Although the mountain base withstood the calamity during the past month, it took preparations, effort, and luck. Lewis Morgan's geokinesis and the existence of the Night-Evered Spirit Tree played vital roles in that event. It meant that the same feat was not possible just by any group of humans. And yet, there it was. A place that was clearly not something that could be built in just a single month. There were a lot of questions that popped up into Mark's mind. But, of course, voicing out those questions right now would not yield any answer. Mark's attention was suddenly peeled off the fortress city, and he turned to Ilya and Shemetris. Fly higher. There are people below. The two were a bit confused as to why Mark suddenly wanted to fly higher. Yes, he said there were people below. But weren't they under optical camouflage? Nonetheless, the two controlled the minicube and flew higher. The minicube flew up high. It reached the point they could see both the entirety of Marivels and Corregidor. It was when Ilya asked Mark, "Why do we have to fly up? They can't see us, right?" "Normal people won't see us," Mark replied with his eyes glued to the settlement in Corregidor. "But we can't gamble in front of a group of mutators." "I see." Ilya nodded, seductively tapping her lips. "Then, what's your plan now?" That was a good question coming from Ilya. If she could only ask a question normally. "I'll go gather information," Mark replied. "Alone?" Ilya asked another, looking at the little girls. Mark shrugged. It was obvious that they wanted to come with him. Even Iola was not an exception. May was not saying anything and would very likely follow Mark's plan. But, of course, she was the one who wanted to go with him the most. At this time, Feng Jiruo spoke. "Can't we all just go together?" The suggestion took everyone's attention. After all, it came from the person that talked the least in the group. Actually, I'm also curious about the place." Feng Jiruo stuttered a bit. After all, the reason why she wanted to go was that she wanted to look around. Well, who would not be curious? Mark wanted to say that it would be dangerous. After all, it was an unknown place. However, with how strong this group was, the danger was the least of their concern. Unless some sort of deity-like being appeared, only then would they be in actual danger. Not to mention the group had all sorts of danger prevention methods. Mark would lose the argument immediately if he was to mention the place being dangerous. Furthermore, Mark turned to Ilya. It was clear that she wanted to chase Mark and the others out. Mark realized. Ilya was a succubus. Even though she could supplement her energy with food, she still needed to absorb a man's vitality. And ever since Shemetris woke up, Ilya did not look for other men. Furthermore, Shemetris's vitality would not run out and even recover, unlike an ordinary human's. Absorbing a man's vitality could be done either by using a dream or doing the deed. And, of course, if it was Shemetris, Ilya preferred doing the deed. Since it was already the second day of their travel, Ilya must be starting to get hungry. And that was why she was asking for some privacy. In the least, Ilya had the conscience to not do it with children around. "All right." Mark shrugged. "Let's all go together." Only Ilya and Shemetris will stay here in the minicube, since they needed to operate it. Mark's decision sure made everyone happy. But, of course, they would not leave without any planning. Day 200 to 7:23 a.m. Slums Gate, Corregidor Military Settlement, Corregidor Island, Province of Cavite. It was the 200th day since the apocalypse started. Well, to most people still alive, the number of days and dates did not matter anymore. While to some, the number of days indicated how long they survived, it was more about how long they had been suffering. Early in the morning, the people were already up. Getting more sleep was the least of their concern, as they needed to find ways to get food into their stomach. As such, at this early time, the slums were already as noisy as a wet market. With a population of a few thousand, it was not surprising that it was packed with people. The place might be noisy, but there was no doubt that the atmosphere was not as lively as a wet market. Most people had a gloomy look. A whole lot of them looked malnourished. Surely, there was not enough food to enter everyone's stomach. The worst part of the slums, security was lax. The military soldiers were watching above the walls of the fortress city. However, they were not inclined to monitor the slums that much. It was not like every soldier did not want to help the people of the slums. However, without orders given to them, they could not move on their own. As such, because of the lacking security, the slums were managed by several gangs. They divided the slums into different gang territories, enforcing their own rules among the populace. And the poor refugees could not do anything. The only thing that kept these people of the slums going was the possibility to enter the gates of the actual settlement. Not everyone could enter the gates. The only way into the gate was to either become an evolver, or mutator, or to buy your entrance to the gates. Becoming evolvers, or mutators, could be a deadly gamble. It was the same for buying their entrance. Furthermore, the payment through the gates was not food or water. Not supplies either. It was mutagen stones. The stone that was rarely found in the heads of the infected. Each person needed 1,000 of that mysterious stone to gain entry. It was a hard thing for regular people. But some people were not giving up. Being inside the walls was far safer than the slums. The slums themselves were also surrounded by their own walls. Unlike the main settlement area, the walls it had were nothing but a bunch of scrap pieces together. These walls were not even provided by the military. It was built by the dwellers of the slums just to give them a bit more sense of safety. Of course, these walls meant nothing much during attacks. Whether it was the infected, or the robots that appeared, they could easily tear down these flimsy walls. It was one of the reasons the slums were allowed to exist. It was because they could cause delay against the attackers before they could reach the walls of the settlement. In fact, many people from the slums died because of such attacks. Even so, the people of the slums were staying. It was not like they had other places to go. Vroom. Vroom. At this time, the sound of a vehicle could be heard. It was one of the signs of the few times the gate of the settlement would open. Many people in the slums gathered to watch. These sounds meant that either a squad of soldiers or a group of scavengers would go out. It was the daily routine of the people to see who would go out of the gates of the settlement. Most of the time, it would be the scavengers. At those times, some of the people would be able to beg for food or anything of value upon their return. There were also times when the scavengers would hire people from the slums as either baggage carriers or baits during hunting. Sure, it was dangerous. But they had no choice if they wanted to continue living. As time passed, the number of people in the slums was slowly decreasing. Death was already a regular occurrence to them. How long had it been since new people arrived here? Probably there were no other people still alive outside. That was their thoughts until today. All of a sudden, the rumor spread out fast. Because of the lack of entertainment, most people entertained themselves using hearsays. It seemed that a group of survivors arrived at this place, managing to traverse the dangerous new earth. Having new arrivals to this hellhole, of course, the people were interested in the rumors. And more than anything else, the group in question consisted mainly of females. Day 200 to 8:11 a.m. Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Corregidor Island, province of Cavite. Here is the place. A man with ragged clothes said, leading a group of survivors in front of a dilapidated structure. The man leading the group opened the door only made of torn tarpaulin and peeked inside. That peek was more than enough to assess the place. The place was not big at all, and it only had one room. It was only enough for the whole group to sleep side by side on the floor. Yes, only sleep. Saying that it was not big was wrong. The place was freaking small. Moreover, the entire structure was made of scrap metal sheets and moldy plywood. The walls and roofs were haphazardly built that there were holes here and there. Not to mention the materials were scrap, obviously having holes and broken parts here and there. The worst of all. A part of the back was destroyed, from the wall to the roof. That broken hole made everything exposed outside. But it was not like there was any other choice. All the structures in the slums were literally built the same. Many people did not even have a place to live and were clearly camping outside, sleeping on cardboard and scrap wood as bedding. All right. This will do. The leader said to their guide. By the way, I have a question. Just ask. The guide in ragged clothes eagerly replied. There are many people who live outside, the leader said, looking at the sleeping spots not far away. Why didn't anyone move in here? It was a reasonable question. Why was this empty when there were a lot of homeless people in the slums? The guide bitterly smiled, closing into the leader's ear, and whispered. It's because of the gang running this area. They collect protection fees once a week, and they ask more from those living in shelters. Many people can't afford the protection fee, and they decided that it's better to live homeless instead. A gang, huh? The leader murmured. Yes, it's called White Snake Gang. They run the northern areas of the slums near the gate. The guide continued. Actually, the rules here are better than the other three sides. That is why there were more homeless people here than in the territories run by other gangs. Here was more dangerous, though. I see. All right, here. The leader sneakily handed the guide a single can of sardines for his work. As he saw the payment, the guide immediately grabbed it and hid it inside his ragged clothes. It was just a single can, not even a big one. That single can, however, was more than enough for the guide's eyes to twinkle and his mouth to salivate. Thank you, boss. If you need anything else, just call me. I live by the gates, and the guards know me. And with his work done, the guide cautiously looked around and scurried off. It was as if he was afraid that the can of sardines would be stolen from him. What a strange person. The petite woman in the group murmured as she watched their guide run away. Strange? I guess not, the leader said, just desperate. Gerger, let's enter already. The woman in the group wearing a hooded jacket and face mask urged their leader. It feels like we are an attraction in a zoo. That was the right feeling as they stood outside the house. Although they were not doing it blatantly, the attention of the people in the surroundings was on them. They were curious and cautious about the unfamiliar people that moved into their place. All right. Let's head inside, the leader said, letting everyone else in their group enter first. After everyone was already inside, the leader looked around first. It caused the onlookers to look away. Then the leader followed the others into the structure. The place was empty. There sure was nothing inside, not even a single chair. All it had was dust and the debris from the broken wall and roof. The leader secured the torn tarpaulin door. He then began removing his hood and mask. Of course, it was no other than Mark. Everyone else followed suit, removing the jackets and masks they were wearing. Everyone was wearing different clothes compared to their usual clothing. There was no armor at this moment. Only thick jacket and face masks to cover their mouths. They even deliberately wore dirty and torn clothes outside. To most people, they looked like regular survivors that worked hard to get here. This is uncomfortable, Spera complained as she lessened her clothes. She was not a fighter type and preferred light clothing. It was not like she hated wearing layers of clothes, but her petite body could not handle it. Won't anyone see us removing these? Feng Jiruo said while removing her one outer layer of clothes. She was cautiously looking around, specifically, the gaps on the walls. "It's fine," Mark said as he helped Abigail remove her jacket. "The people outside might be curious, but they are warier of strangers. Besides, we only wore disguises to make sure no one would bother us. They would be more cautious of people whose faces are hidden, after all." Mark added. "Sounds like you speak from experience," Sparrow remarked, but Mark ignored the arrow hitting his back. "Anyway, I'm surprised we managed to get in without problems." Sparrow continued and stared at Mark. "How did you know that you can bribe the soldiers at the gates to avoid more questions? They even called that guy to guide us somewhere we could stay." Mark shrugged and remembered their entry to this place moments ago. The main gates of the slums were guarded. There was a small military encampment right beside it. However, only 2 soldiers were posted at that time. They were definitely surprised to see new people still alive. Without a doubt, Mark's group would be bombarded with questions. However, Mark sneakily put a packet of cigarettes on the hand of the soldier that was asking him questions, telling him that they were already tired from their journey. The soldier understood that Mark did not want to be questioned any longer and stopped the other soldier from asking more questions. Afterward, Mark exchanged a few sentences with the bribed soldier, and it led to the current situation. "Sometimes, you should observe the faces of the people in front of you," Mark replied to Sparrow. "Those guys were clearly not that happy with their current work. Who would want to guard the gates of the slums, after all? They were also the closest to danger. If they could lighten their work and receive a small benefit, they would gladly do so." "Really?" Sparrow asked. "Yep, really," Mark replied. "But well, I also made sure that I'm right and read their emotions. In the end, it's because you're an empath that you succeeded." Sparrow yapped. "I can't deny that." Mark shrugged. "I'm not an expert in reading faces either." "Im. A small noise could be heard. "Eh?" Mark bitterly voiced out as he let out a Mihan from the bag he was carrying. "Master." Amihan shouted in a complaining tone. She clearly heard Mark and the other talking since they already arrived at their destination, but she was still stuck inside the bag. "Sorry," Mark said, patting Amihan's head with his finger. "Sparrow had a lot of questions I forgot to let you out." "Why did the blame fall unto me?" Sparrow blurted out, pouting. While continuing their banter, they cleaned and prepared their current dwelling. No one had problems sharing the whole place. Women usually would not want to share a room with men. When they spent the night in the ruins of Bay City, Sparrow and Feng Jiruo stayed together in a separate tent. It was the same when they camped last night. Unfortunately, there was no choice this time. It was not like there was really an issue. The 2 girls knew that Mark was not interested in them at all and would not do something unethical in their sleep. Even if he was a perverted monster and forced himself unto them, they would not be able to protect themselves because of the disparity in strength. It was all just for the sake of comfort and the fact that they did not want to bother Mark's family during the night. "Gerger, what are we going to do with this?" May asked Mark, pointing at the broken wall and roof. As said before, even if they were inside, Mark and the others were still exposed from outside because of the broken wall. Fortunately, that wall was actually right beside the wall of the slums. The distance between the walls was also tight. Thus, no one could pass by that direction unless they forced themselves through the small gap of the walls. Mark tapped his chin. It was not only the destroyed wall and roof, but he was also observing the small gaps on the walls here and there. "Maybe we can use the tarpaulin from the tents we had," Mark suggested. "Wait, why not just build the tent inside? With the size of this place, we can fix 2 tents, tightly side by side. We just need to fix it a bit." Although it would be a bit of work, everyone agreed with Mark's suggestion. Aside from Mark, everyone here was girls. None of them would want people peeking into the house through the gaps on the walls. It took them until almost noon to fix up the place. It was small, but the work that needed to be done was a lot. In any case, they managed to set up their base of operations in this place. Why base of operations? It was because they would probably need a few days to achieve their goals here. As they ate their lunch of canned food, Mark was closing his eyes from time to time. "How is it?" May asked Mark after he opened his eyes. Mark shook his head as his initial reply. "I found some familiar fluctuations. I'm pretty sure they're people from Bay City. But I didn't find any of the people we are close with yet." "They might be inside the walls," Mark added. "I can't reach them, though, since we are still pretty far from the walls." What Mark said was true. The fortress city was pretty large for a settlement, but the slums surrounding it were far larger. And since the house they were brought to was right next to the wall, they were literally just a step from outside. They were on the edge of the slums and the furthest place from the fortress city. "What are your plans now?" Spera asked. "Well, for now, you all stay here and rest," Mark replied as he ate a spoonful of canned tuna. "I'm going to spend the rest of the day gathering information. It will be good if I can find people we are familiar with." Not everyone was happy with Mark's plan. After all, they would be staying put while Mark did all the work. However, they understood that they had no choice, at least for now. They were women, after all, and would be subjected to some unpleasant things in this place with poor security. But then, Mark added, "But well, I might go out later and stay for a bit, though." Why?" Spera asked. "The guide earlier said that the slums are run by gangs asking for protection fees and stuff. I'm sure that our arrival reached them already, and they will pay us a visit immediately." Then Mark glanced at his right hand. He was currently holding a large feather with the mark of a weighing scale, a balance. "There is also another person," unexpectedly, Mark added as he stared at the feather. Those words made the rest confused. What did Mark mean? There was another person who would come to visit them? Unexpectedly, their questions were answered not long after. Just while they were cleaning the things they used to eat, Mark suddenly spoke loudly. "Don't just stand outside and come in already," and surely, someone entered. "As expected, you knew that I'm going to arrive." A voice of a mature woman was heard as the tarpaulin door opened. Day 200 to 1:02 p.m., dilapidated shack, North Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Corregidor Island, province of Cavite. Mark called out the person waiting outside to come in all of a sudden. The person in question entered, pushing the tarpaulin door slightly to the side. Even though Mark called the person to come inside, everyone else was on guard. But why? Inside this dilapidated shack, everyone was not just a regular human. Mark, May, and the three little girls were blood demons. Amihan was a spirit of the wind, a sylph, while Feng Zhiro was a cultivator. And although she might be the weakest, Spera was still an esper. Each of them had enhanced senses and would surely detect someone that was standing right outside their doorstep. Moreover, with how small the shack was, they were literally just a few steps near the door. Yet, none of them detected any presence of the person until the person spoke. The mature voice gave it away that it was a woman. However, what entered had an unexpected appearance. With a torn, dirty white dress and long hair covering her face, one would think that the woman came from a Japanese cursed tape. She was even barefooted to complete the package. "It looks like everyone is wary of me," the woman said, sensing the cautiousness of the members of Mark's group. "All of you should relax," Mark spoke. "This woman is an information dealer, and I have a previous deal with her." "Information dealer? Then she's Vanessa?" May voiced. "Yep, that's Secretary of General Padilla. But her name's not really Vanessa," Mark affirmed. May stared at the woman. If she remembered correctly, this woman's name was supposed to be Val Flora. Still, she could not help but notice the complete contrast between the Vanessa they met before and the beggar standing in front of them now. Vanessa was a gorgeous woman and someone definitely garnering attention. The current Val Flora did not only look like someone who lost her mind but felt more like a pebble on the road that no one would pay attention to. "What's with the get-up?" Mark asked frankly. "Please, pay no mind to my current appearance," Val Flora replied with a smile hidden under her hair. "People like me needed to blend in the surroundings while avoiding as much attention as possible. It was unless we needed to garner attention based on the job we had." It was a reasonable answer. After all, Mark's group was currently in the slums. Beggars and even crazy-looking people were pretty much common here. But to still wear a disguise even if she could perfectly hide her presence, she was thorough in her line of work. This way, even if there were people who would manage to see her through, they would only think that she was nothing but a crazy beggar. If there are no more questions, I suggest going back to business, Valflora said to Mark. I am also a busy person, considering I have yet to fulfill our contract. Those words from Valflora were more than enough for Mark to understand what she was here for. While she was here to give Mark the information he wanted, it seemed that it was only a part of it. Here it is, Valflora said, pulling the neck of her loose clothing and pulling something from between her breasts. She then presented what seemed to be a black-colored tube container to Mark. Sure enough, the women in Mark's group looked strange as they gazed at the information dealer in front of them. Noticing those gazes, Valflora spoke in a mischievous tone. I apologize if you all felt uncomfortable by this, but in my current appearance, there was no place as secure to hide such an important item. The reply would have been fine alone. However, Valflora was clearly looking at the chests of the women in Mark's group that were not as ample as hers. I don't think that teasing my members is part of our deal, Mark said as he took the tube container. By the way, even though you said you were busy, do you have time for a side job? Valflora looked at Mark. She was definitely kind of eager to work with a client that would pay for the service handsomely. However, she shook her head. My apologies. I wish to work with you on another deal, but my current schedule is tight, Valflora replied. But I can guess that the work you wanted to give me is about this settlement, is it not? Valflora sure was not an information dealer for nothing. She already analyzed the situation of Mark's group and why they were in the slums. With the capabilities of Mark's group, it would be easy to enter the walls of the settlement legitimately. However, as they were wary of the strange situation, they decided to hide first and gather information. Unfortunately, I can't really offer much information instantly as I only arrived here to meet you, Valflora continued. But I can at least say that this place existed due to your government's cooperation with our organization. That piece of information answered the biggest question. If a worldwide underground organization was involved, it might really be possible for this place to exist. But another question popped up. How? The CNC was not some cheap organization. It was an underground business organization and would surely want to profit from the current situation of Earth. To build this fortress with the help of the CNC would definitely cost an astronomical sum. Furthermore, it would not be money but valuable resources. And as far as Mark knew, the Philippines was not a rich country to be able to afford it. So, how? You must be confused as to how your country managed to pay the services of our organization, Valflora said, seemingly reading Mark's thoughts. Unfortunately, even I had no idea. The transaction between our organization and your government was overseen by another group. We have our own rules for confidentiality, and those not involved in the transaction could not inquire about the information without paying a suitable price. I see. Mark nodded. But are you sure saying these things to us? Don't tell me that you will ask for payment for this small piece of information? Please, do not worry. I won't do something that distasteful, especially to an important client. Valflora replied. This information is free. To begin with, it is not valuable at all to people who knew the existence of our organization. That was true. To the people that knew of CNC, it would not be long for them to realize its involvement in this settlement. To those that never heard of the organization, they would need effort and might still not find the answer, making the information more valuable to those people. In that case, I delivered the information I had for now, Valflora declared. The rest of the information would be delivered at a future date. Just please make sure to have the feather close at all times and never lose it. And without waiting for any inquiry or words, Valflora turned around, facing the tarpaulin door. I am going. Until next time. Valflora began to step out of the shack but paused and gave a last glance at Mark. One piece of advice before I go. Be cautious about the current leaders of your country. And with those words, Valflora passed through the door. Once she did, her presence vanished once more. Only Mark was able to still find her, walking along the street towards the gates of the slums. That woman, she's like a ghost, Feng Jiruo remarked, finally removing her hand from the hilt of her sword. Even though Mark told them to relax, she could not help but feel wary of the strange Valflora. You should really relax, Mark told Feng Jiruo. She might be suspicious, but as long as I'm her client, she's our ally. You have a point, but it's also not wrong to be cautious, Spera said, siding with Feng Jiruo. Mark just shrugged. Unlike him, who could read a person's intention using their emotions, the others were relying on their instincts. And, without a doubt, Valflora was a dangerous person. That was why these girls were against lowering their guards. In any case, it was now time to open the tube container. Mark wanted to see what information Valflora brought to him. Papa, let me see too. Iola approached, interested in it. Her interest was understandable. She had Keeper's memories, and she surely wanted to know the location of the other inheritors. Okay, come here, Mark said, taking a seat on a mat on the ground. Iola sat down beside him as he opened the tube container. Opening the tube container, it contained a strip of paper about half the size of an A4 paper. It was neatly folded, and strange enough, the curl and folds of the paper vanished as Mark unfolded it. It was not just a regular piece of paper. Mark and Iola frowned, however. Is something wrong? May asked, seeing the frown on the face of the two. Mama, the paper is blank, Iola replied. Surely, that was strange. There was no way that Valflora would deliver a blank piece of paper. However, it was not exactly blank. On the center of the paper was a watermark, showing the symbol of Crystallis Notitia Cetus. Wait. Mark realized something as he took out the feather that Valflora gave him. He then put the feather onto the paper. Unexpectedly, the symbols on both the feather and the paper glowed for a bit. Once Mark removed the feather, the symbol on the paper was gone. Instead, there were letters written on it. Well, isn't that amazing? Mark voiced out. They sure are strict, making sure that only the client would be able to read it. It was a foolproof transaction. Even if the information was somehow lost or stolen, no one would be able to read it. It was a good feeling, knowing that the information you paid for would not be leaked to others easily. I just wished she explained it. Mark sighed. She probably thought that Gerger would figure it out easily. May said. But how did you figure it out? Spera asked. The aura of the feather and the symbol on the paper is the same. It's Valflora's aura. So I thought that it was some sort of luck, and the feather is the key. Mark replied before proceeding to read the information on the paper. Mark seemed to be thinking deeply. 4 people, huh? One of them is someone you know, Spera. Shin, right? Spera asked. Yeah. Mark nodded. 1 in China, 2 in Japan, and 1 in Indonesia. Looks like we will be going overseas again soon. I don't know why they seem to be concentrated here in Asia, though. The piece of planetary debris that carried the crystal exploded near this country, Iola said. Because of that, the spread of the crystals started here in Asia. Iola's explanation had a point. And since Keeper was the creator of the Psi crystal, her words had more validity in them. Well, let's deal with the trouble in this country and go abroad as quickly as possible. Mark decided. He still had a lot to do, after all. But before everything, Mark turned to May. What are you doing with that? Mark asked as May took the tube container away. I'm going to dispose of it. May replied. You don't really have to, Mark said, scratching his head. We can still use that for something. Then Mark added with a sigh. You don't have to act like that. It's not like I'm going to sniff and lick that or something. And if I'm going to sniff or lick something, I won't do it on a metal container when I have someone. Mark just said that without thinking too much about it. However, May was frozen stiff, with her face red as a tomato. If you two are going to flirt, go get a room, Spera complained, glancing at Feng Jiruo, whose face was also red. Unlike Spera, their cultivator companion was still not used to Mark and May's shenanigans from time to time. Day 200 to 4:21 p.m. Dilapidated shack, northern slums, Corregidor military settlement, island of Corregidor, province of Cavite. After Val Flora's visit, everyone stayed inside the shack, including Mark. They took the opportunity to rest and do some things, like cleaning their weapons. Unfortunately for Feng Jiruo, while cultivating her inner energy was how she spent her time, it was impossible to do so currently. Cultivation needed deep concentration. Although Mark and the others would likely allow her to do so, the noise from outside would not. In this case, Feng Jiruo could only meditate lightly. She was pondering about her techniques and how to improve them. Feng Jiruo sure was a hard-working cultivator, however, compared to the group of cultivators she was with when she met Mark and May, she was severely lacking. In talent, that was. Fortunately, while their first encounter was awful, meeting Mark and May became the best opportunity for Feng Jiruo's life. The aura emitted by Chio, the night-evered pure spirit tree, was highly beneficial for Feng Jiruo's cultivation. And now, although it was just in terms of inner strength, Feng Jiruo was already stronger compared to her elder disciples that Mark killed. That leap of cultivation was unexpected since with her talent, measured in her sect, she would need at least 10 more years to reach the level she was currently in, probably more. That was how hard cultivation was in the magicless mortal world. Although now that the magical energy on Earth was restored, regular cultivation became a bit faster. Nonetheless, it could not be compared to the cultivation speed that Feng Jiruo had while inside Mark's base. Without a doubt, one of the things that boosted Feng Jiruo's cultivation was not just Chio's aura. The environment in the mountain base also helped a whole lot. Back in her sect, the poor talent that Feng Jiruo had shoved her to become an errand girl for those better than her. She came timider and was pushed around without being able to retaliate. She even belonged to the lower caste of disciples tasked to do menial things around the sect. In the mountain base, the treatment of people towards Feng Jiruo was far better, even if she was nothing but a prisoner that Mark brought back. The nice environment and interaction with people led her to a better outlook both in mind and body. It was a kind of mindset that was needed for her to be able to cultivate faster. And now, here she was, tagging along with Mark and May to gain experience outside the new world with her current cultivation. The first step of human transcendence, in Feng Jiruo's sect, the Gutianzhengong or Ancient Sky Sword Palace, there were 4 levels of cultivation. Each level had 2 divisions, while each division was divided further into 5 steps. First was human level, divided into human transcension and human transcendence. Next was deityhood, divided into deity transcension and deity transcendence. The third was godhood, which was divided into godly transcension and godly transcendence. Lastly was immortality, being divided into immortal transcension and immortal transcendence. Each level was divided into 2, indicating the process of transcending and having transcended that level. In Feng Jiruo's case, she was now at a level that transcended the limits of humans. Back when she met Mark and May, she was only at the 2nd step of human transcension. Yes, she was stronger than regular humans at that time, but she was still within the limits of what regular humans could achieve. Her level rose by 3 after she was captured by Mark. And at the age of 21, Feng Jiruo, having reached the 1st step of human transcendence, could be regarded as one of the best talents in her sect. Don't forcefully try to cultivate. All of a sudden, Mark's voice entered Feng Jiruo's ears, forcing her to open her eyes. If you managed to enter deep cultivation and got disturbed by the noise, you'll receive a backlash. I know. Feng Jiruo respectively nodded and replied, I'm just pondering my techniques. In that case, it's fine, Mark said, turning around and going back to his work. At this point, Feng Jiruo could not help but stare at Mark's back. This man in front of her sure was a mysterious person with a lot of secrets. It was not the first time that Mark gave Feng Jiruo some pointers and guidance. It was not only on her cultivation but also her sword techniques. In fact, he greatly helped her in reaching her current level. The strangest thing that Feng Zhiro could not fathom was how Mark was able to teach her. No, not only her but also Mei. Both Feng Zhiro's cultivation and sword techniques were exclusive to her sect. Yet, Mark showed deep knowledge of it for some reason unknown. But did that really matter? At first, yes. Feng Zhiro mulled over this for quite a while. Then, after some time, she stopped thinking. What mattered was that she was receiving pointers from Mark from time to time. In fact, she learned more from Mark than the elder that taught her in the past. And yes, it was that elder that Mark killed. Mark was more or less her master now. However, she could not call him that, as a master and disciple relationship should be mutual. There was no need to mention that Mark was not a part of her sect. With those thoughts in mind, Feng Zhiro closed her eyes, going back to pondering over her sword techniques. Mark glanced at Feng Zhiro, knowing that her inquisitive gaze was gone. He knew that she had a lot of questions, but he was not inclined to answer. After all, there was no way he would tell others that he could absorb the minds and souls of those who tried to take over his body, taking over their memories and some of their abilities. Of course, with that elder's case, Mark was also kind of bummed over it. The elder had quite a cultivation at the first step of deity transcension, but all those cultivation and techniques were unusable by Mark for some reason. More because his body had miasma, disabling him to gather and use his inner energy. As an otaku, Mark was also a fan of Chinese manhwa and novels, both wuxia and shenxia. Now that he knew those things actually existed, it would be a lie if he said he did not want to learn it. Now, he had knowledge of it but was unable to use it. It was quite a disappointment for him, who did not really feel much emotions. Mark sighed as he continued cleaning his weapon set. It might not be long before he used these once more. After all, the place they were currently in was not a peaceful one. Soon enough, Mark noticed something and turned to the others. "Stay inside," Mark said as he stood up, wore his face mask and jacket, and went out. Just as he walked out, a group of people was coming from the west direction. They were walking on the path between the shelters and camps. It was clear that they were heading towards the direction of the dilapidated shack that Mark's group was staying. Mark stood to the side of the door, leaning his back on the frame of the non-existent door. The incoming group saw Mark go out and became confused. Mark did not hide that he was looking at the group. It meant that he knew they were coming and was waiting. Surely, this situation was confusing for them. Soon, the group arrived in front of Mark. There were 7 of them wearing clothes different from the rags that most of the people in the slums wore. They were also armed with weapons, ranging from knives to pistols. One even had an assault rifle on his hands, while another had a machete. Both the assault rifle and the machete were military grades to boot. A rather bulky man, supposedly the leader of the group and the one with the machete, stepped forward. "Are you the leader of the group that arrived this morning?" the man asked Mark. Without a doubt, the news of Mark's group arriving this morning spread out. They might have worn disguises, but a small group of people surviving the New Earth and arriving in this place was more than enough to cause gossip. And by the looks of the people in front of Mark, they were definitely the members of the gang controlling the northern slums and the very same people collecting the so-called protection fees in this area. "I am," Mark replied, not moving an inch from his position. "Are you the members of that White Snake gang?" It was not odd that these newcomers knew of their gang. Any person nearby knew about it. Nonetheless, Mark's lack of fear and disrespect towards the group sure made them frown. Only the leader of the group did not show any reaction and instead was looking at Mark as if he was measuring him. "If you know who we are, then there is no need to explain." The leader spoke. "Then, should also know that we are here to collect the fees. But since you people are new here, we can give an extension and collect it another day." It was quite unexpected, but these gang members were behaving reasonably. Usually, when one said that it was a gang, they would do anything just to force the person to pay on the spot. It made Mark remember that compared to the other gangs ruling the slums, these people were the ones asking the lowest fees. Not only that, but they were not forcing the homeless to pay. Before everything, I want to ask something. Mark stared at the leader and replied, "What is this fee for? Are you people really protecting the people here, or is it just some sort of extortion?" Mark was quite frank with his question. It would not be surprising if it ended in a fight. The people around watching started to hide, fearing that it would happen. And to say, it was what Mark wanted. If it was just protection fees, Mark did not need to pay for it. They could protect themselves without anyone's help. If a fight started and Mark beat them single-handedly, it would be proof that Mark's group did not need any protection. Of course, it could end up becoming worse with the other members of the gang attacking Mark's group as reinforcements. Nonetheless, Mark was not afraid. Unexpectedly, the members of the gang group did not make any moves. Instead, they glanced at their leader, waiting for orders. The leader did not say anything for a few moments and just stared at Mark. Mark did the same. Knowing that Mark would not budge and was waiting for the answer without a shred of fear, the leader took a step back. The leader of this group did not want to start a fight against Mark's group at all. Knowing that they survived the New Earth, along with its dangers with just a small group, there was a huge chance that they were mutators. The gang had its own mutators, and the leader of this group was one. However, a fight between mutators could end up terribly for both parties involved. Besides, this group was here to say a reminder, not to fight. After a long silence and stare-down, the leader of the group spoke. "Men, let's go." The leader then turned around, with his men following and glancing at Mark. Then, as the group began to leave, the leader left a few more words. "It's useless to answer using words. Tonight, go at the gates and see for yourself." Mark watched the group leave, looking a bit disappointed. He knew that 2 of the members of the group were mutators, the rest were evolvers. The 7 of them sure were a group of strong people compared to the regular people around here. Mark wanted to know the ability of that bulky man. Of course, Mark had no plans to kill the guy. In fact, Mark's question, while frank, was not with dislike or anything. He really wanted to know what the fee was for. After all, there was no way that a mutator, with a subconscious trait of righteousness, would join or lead a merciless gang. Day 200 to 4:51 p.m. Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Corregidor Island, Province of Cavite. The brief encounter of the 7 members of White Snake Gang and Mark ended with the leader of this group leaving Mark a vague invitation. "Sir Husto, are we just going to leave?" A younger member of the group asked their leader. "That man just arrived here, and he's not giving us any respect." Without a doubt, the man they encountered just now hit their pride. Being the rulers of the northern slums, most people here give them respect. But to the young one's question, the leader shook his head and ruffled the young man's already messy hair. "What respect do you want? Respect out of fear? Remember that we are a gang, but not that kind of gang, kiddo." The bulky-bodied leader, Husto, said. "Besides, we are not here to start a fight. And remember, do not start a fight that you can't guarantee you will win." Unless you did not have any other choice left, for Sir Husto to say that, "You mean we can't win against a single person?" Another member chimed in. "We got 2 mutators, and the rest are evolvers. Even if their group managed to survive outside until now, I don't think they will be able to defeat us in a fig ouch." The young man did not manage to finish his words due to pain. His forehead got flicked by their group leader without him realizing it. "Do not be stupid," Husto said, retracting his hand. "This is why you all are still wet behind your ears. None of you know what kind of dangerous situation you are in." The members could not believe the words of their leader immediately. It was not a surprising reaction. Husto aside, the oldest within this group he was leading was only 25, while the youngest was 17. They were in the age where getting in a higher position than expected would lead to arrogance and pride. Being a member of a gang ruling an entire area of the slums was such a position. Knowing what was in the minds of these youngsters, Husto continued. "You all lacked experience, so none of you felt it. But the man we just met had more blood in his hands than all of you combined. Probably even me included. Well, he must have killed a lot of infected outside. One of the youngsters chimed in, causing Husto to look at him with a slight shake of his head. I'm not talking about the infected, what I meant. That man killed people. Living people. Husto said with a deep voice. It will be hard for you youngsters to fight someone who had more experience in killing people. Those words from their group leader made the youngsters shiver. If that's the case, isn't it dangerous to just let that guy stay here? Also, isn't the members of his group women and children? Did he threaten them to stick with him as playthings? The youngest one spoke. Then what do you want to do? Drive him away? For what? Because of something you thought? Husto asked. I did say that he had blood in his hands, but we had no clue whether those people he killed are innocent or not. The world now is to kill or be killed. While what you have in mind could possibly be true, it could also be possible that those women and children are his family members. And outside, even here, women are being targeted by immoral people. In that case, someone like him would have no choice but to kill if he wanted to protect them. Being reprimanded, the youngest one shut his mouth. It was the same for the others, thinking of the things that Husto said. In any case, you youngsters should learn more, Husto said after the silence ensued. Do not come to conclusions when you know nothing. It is the same when underestimating the people in front of you. And with those words, Husto's group made their rounds on the eastern side of the northern slums. It was not only their group who were patrolling the northern slums. The 7 of them were just one of the groups under the White Snake Gang. When they passed by the gates of the slums, Husto could not help but glance at the soldiers guarding the entrance. Their lax attitude made the bulky man shake his head. Those soldiers are good for nothing, the youngest of the group whispered. What they are doing can't even be called guarding. The quality of soldiers degraded since I was in the army, Husto said. Back then, just getting caught yawning on lookout duty can get you some punishment. But these people, they were even playing cards on duty. Husto's group completed their rounds and went back to their base. Nonetheless, his eyes were still glued to the uniform of the soldiers they passed by on the way. After all, Husto was once a dedicated soldier. Even the first in his batch of cadets in the academy. Unfortunately, his soldier career was cut short after a bullet hit his shoulder during the conflict with the terrorists on the island of Sulu in Mindanao. The bullet left a permanent injury that he was still suffering from even now. Nonetheless, Husto's career as a soldier might have ended early, but he was still a soldier at heart, protecting the citizens as much as he could. ****. They left easily. Spera asked Mark as he entered the shack after the members of the White Snake Gang left. The leader of the group did not seem to want to cause conflict, Mark said as he sat down on the floor. For a gang, these guys seem to be decent. A decent gang. They're oddballs. Feng Jiruo chimed in. Seems like you have a bad experience with gangs. Mei noticed the ire in Feng Jiruo's tone with the word, gang. In the world of Zhonghu, cultivation and Chinese mysticism, the word gang is deeply associated with criminals, bandits, and practitioners of the dark path. Feng Jiruo explained. They cause a lot of troubles and kill without remorse. My parents were also killed by a gang when they attacked our village. It was way before I entered the sect. Huh? Mark was a bit confused. The Chinese government don't take action about those things? And there, Feng Jiruo shook her head. If it is just a regular gang of mortals, the Chinese government might get involved. Feng Jiruo replied. Unfortunately, there is an agreement between the government and Zhonghu where the government could not meddle with those things unless things went out of control. Our village was just a small one at the foot of a desolate mountain. Because of that, it was easy to cover up what happened did not reach even a single person in the mortal community. Sure enough, it was a surprising circumstance. After all, while Mark and Mei were nowhere regular people before the outbreak, the scope of their knowledge was only on the surface. Now, they were beginning to see the hidden side of the governments they knew nothing about in the past. In fact, even the Philippine government had a dark side. The current state of this settlement was the proof of that. Well, Are you going to the gates later? Spera asked Mark. After all, everyone inside the shack heard the conversation between Mark and the leader of that group. I'm going to gather information later, so I might as well check it, Mark replied. I'm also kind of interested why he told me to go there. Asterisk 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 time passed with those small conversations. Night finally came and it was time for Mark to start his investigation. Mark planned to go a bit earlier, but with the sudden visit of Val Flora and the delayed one with the gang members, he ended up deciding to leave at nightfall. All right, I'm leaving, Mark said to everyone. You guys can sleep since the 3 golems are already out. The 3 golems were not living creatures. They could be stored within Mark and May's rings. As such, the 3 were inside the rings when the group entered the slums. After all, Brynhilde could not be disguised since her maid's clothing was built with her body. The 2 animal golems would also spark some trouble if they entered with the group. Now, however, the 3 could be sent out to guard for the night. However, who can sleep now? Spera said. We're unfamiliar with the place. Who would be able to sleep peacefully? Well, you don't have to sleep, but at least get some rest. Mark replied. Gerger, take care, May said, followed by the goodbyes of the little girls. Feng Jiruo did not say anything and just gave Mark an assuring nod. With that, Mark went out. However, no one saw him at all as his body turned into a surge of black mist that blended into the darkness of the night. The surge of black mist flew up to the sky. The moment that Mark appeared, his wings opened, as he engraved the view below into his mind. Mark's group had seen the settlement far from the sky while inside the mini-cube, however, seeing it up close was still different. Right now, Mark could see more of the settlement's appearance. And to say, the scene in the slums and the one inside the walls was vastly different. The inside of the walls was rather bright. Whether it be the streets or the rooms of the buildings, there were lights installed. The presence of electricity was not surprising considering the solar panels on the roof of the buildings and some towers with wind turbines. However, the insides of the walls seemed to be gloomy. There was almost no one in the streets. Maybe, because it was rather safe within the walls, everyone could get a proper sleep schedule. In contrast to the city within the walls, the slums were livelier despite the lacking illumination. The only place riddled with lighting was the street from the gates of the slums to the gate of the fortress walls. It was also the place bustling with activity despite the time of the day. Mark could not help but notice the groups of people entering the gates. However, they were not new survivors, but groups of people from the slums and, definitely, from inside the fortress walls. It was not hard to differentiate between the 2 kinds of people. The groups from the slums had ragged clothing and makeshift weapons. The other had rather good equipment overall. Furthermore, those groups that live inside the walls were mutators and evolvers. There were also mutators and evolvers within the groups from the slums. However, their numbers were far fewer. But why were they outside? The reason was clear. It was either to hunt or scavenge, and since staying outside during the night was far dangerous than the day, they were all returning. Most of the groups had carts filled with what seemed to be scrap materials. Some had carcasses of evolved animals they managed to hunt. Their goals outside might be different, however, it seemed that their destination as they returned was the same. Mark flew, hiding within the shadows of the clouds. There, he saw the destination of the groups. Just outside the northern gates of the fortress city, there was a structure managed by the military. By the looks of it, the people from the slums were selling scrap materials for food. It was a good system since those scrap materials could be recycled for military use. At the same time, it urged the refugees to work and fill their stomachs. Of course, it was not all good things. The attention of people returning from outside was taken by a group that just returned. All of them seemed to be injured with their clothes bloodied. And from what Mark could feel from that group's emotional fluctuations, they were devastated and mourning. It was very likely that a member of their group died today. It was not surprising but still painful for the victims. Not to mention that the group did not seem to have anything to bring home. Not only that they lost someone and were riddled with injuries, they would be sleeping with empty stomachs tonight. Leaving the gates of the slums, Mark flew around to find what could possibly be the reason that the leader of that group invited him into. And it was not hard to find it. In fact, even if Mark was not looking for it, he would see it. Seeing the scene, Mark could not help but feel surprised. He wanted to watch it closely and flew down as a surge of mist into a dark alley. Day 200 to 6:59 p.m. Main Street, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Without stepping out of the dark alley, Mark observed the scene in front of him. As the location was just a branching path from the main street, it would not be surprising that it had a lot of people. However, it was different from the main street where the people were returning from outside. The reason was, instead of adults, there were more children in this place. Yes, children. Since the emotional fluctuations of children were weaker compared to adults, Mark would find it hard to count the number. Still, there would be around 100, probably more. At first glance, one would think that it was where children, most likely orphans, were staying. But that was not the case here. Most of the children stood in line, while those who were not were sitting anywhere they could. Those that sat down were voraciously consuming the thing on their hands. It was servings of watered-down soup, using coconut shells as bowls and a chip of the coconut shell as spoons. The food might not sound appetizing, but these children did not care. They were hungry and were very likely thankful for the food. "So, this is what that guy wanted me to see," Mark murmured as he stared at the small shack where the watered-down soup was being served. The shack was built like a fast food stall, with a large window and a counter. It was clear that this structure was created for the purpose of serving food, and very likely, for these children. And who were the ones behind it? Looking at the armed people around the shack, it was not hard to know who. The White Snake Gang. Even the bulky man and some of the members of the gang Mark met earlier were present to guard the location. Who would have thought that an armed group who labeled themselves a gang was doing such charity work? No wonder now why a mutator with a righteous subconscious was among the gang members. Furthermore, by the looks of it, the gang was not only serving orphans. It did not matter whether they still had parents or not. As long as they were children, they were free to line up for a bowl. Mark could even see parents, who were clearly emaciated, waiting for their children. Of course, not to snatch their share, but let the children have their fill. There were also children who shared their food with their parents, but it seemed that the children were strictly required to eat half of their bowl before they could share and were strictly watched by the gang members. Now that Mark saw this, he remembered the guide they had earlier. While the man lowered his voice when mentioning the gang, he did not show much fear about their existence. It meant that this so-called White Snake Gang was not an armed group known for threatening the people in their territory. Still, they seemed strict to their rules, and no one was trying to take advantage of the children to get a meal for themselves. Mark did not expect to see such a warming sight today, especially when everything was going downhill. In any case, Mark understood why that bulky man told him to come here instead of answering his question. No one would believe the answer even if they told the truth. Well, Mark would have believed them, though. While watching, Mark noticed someone. It was the guide this morning. It seemed that he was not alone and brought a child along. Mark saw the guide urging the child to line up before going to the side of the street and to wait. The man that guided Mark's group stood at the side, watching the child he brought with a helpless smile. That was when someone stood beside him, making him glance at the person cautiously, and he was surprised. "Boss," the guide exclaimed at the familiar man that he met this morning. He sure was respectful, considering that this man gave him a precious can of food just for the meager task of guiding them. Mark stepped out of the alley and approached the man. There was no need to hide this time. There were a lot of people in the area. Walking in the open would not gather much attention at all. Furthermore, standing in a dark alley would be more suspicious if someone was to find him somehow. Besides, when gathering information, there were times that it was better to ask people than just to observe the surroundings. "Your child?" Mark asked the guide as an opening remark. This way, the awkwardness of the guide would lessen due to Mark's sudden appearance here. Unexpectedly, the guide shook his head with a bitter smile and pitiful eyes. "That's my niece, boss," the man replied. "My younger sister's child." "I guess I don't have to ask where her parents are now," Mark said, knowing the man's emotions inside. He then switched the topic. "Have they been doing this all along?" The man was confused at first, but when he saw Mark looking at the armed men, he understood the question. "Not exactly." The man answered Mark's question. "The White Snake Gang only took over this area after the survivors from Bay City Settlement arrived. The previous gang in charge of this area was just the same as others. It's good that they disbanded after the earthquake since most of their members died." "Are they from Bay City?" Mark asked another question. "I don't know if all of them came from Bay City," the man answered once more. "Many settlements converged here after the world changed and when that invisible barrier vanished. What only know is the leaders of the gang came from Bay City and had relations with General Perez." This was not unexpected. For a gang to continue operating here, they must have some connection inside or with the military. In fact, if one was to see the situation objectively, the government allowed these gangs to exist in order to minimize their resource expenditure in managing the survivors in the slums. Since the slums were handled by the gangs, there was no need to continuously send soldiers to control the masses. After all, if the people of the slums acted up and forced themselves into the fortress city, even the government would have a hard time subduing them. But if the White Snake Gang was doing some charity work, it would not be surprising that they had General Perez behind them. The question now was who were the leaders of the White Snake Gang? They're doing this sh*t again. What is the point of wasting food on these worthless twerps? A rather loud voice was heard while Mark and the man were talking. The voice was filled with ridicule and sure was heard by many people nearby. Those that heard the voice looked at who spoke, only to avert their gazes with fearful expressions. Mark did the same as the others and glanced at the loud bastard. What he saw was a group of armed men. Since they were not wearing any covers on their faces, their mocking expressions were open for everyone to see. Nonetheless, none of those who heard wanted to reprimand that group. "They are members of the gang from the West Slums, the Powder Gang." The man spoke to Mark, knowing that he had no idea who those bastards were. They were a gang of drug addicts. If you come across them outside, it's better to run. They're notorious for extortion. They won't even hesitate to kill if they were offended. "People still live in their territory?" Mark asked. "Not as many as here, but there are. Most of them were those with addictions to drugs," the man replied. "No one knows who is backing them, but it seems that they were being supplied with illegal drugs from their backer." Mark nodded in understanding. With illegal drugs as bait, those with addiction would definitely be at their disposal, and looking at the current situation, the members of that gang sure were *SSHOLES. "Drac, this is not the place for you addicts to voice your opinions." Another voice was heard. It was the bulky man that Mark spoke to earlier. "Go back to your waste of a drug den." The bulky man stepped forward, followed by some of the members of the White Snake Gang. However, the group of the man called Drac did not seem to be afraid. "What are you talking about, Husto? We are a democratic country." Drac sneered. "We are free to voice our opinions. And my opinion is you, and your group, are a bunch of idiots." Surely, there was friction happening at this moment. It was clear that the guy called Drac was provoking a fight. Because of the heated situation, the children lining up began to back away. Even the bystanders and those just passing by started to retreat. If a fight between the two groups suddenly happened here, it was the civilians who would suffer the most. Of course, the members of the White Snake Gang did not want that to happen. Although they were standing with a brave front, they were not doing anything to start the fight. Instead, the group led by the bulky man named Husto stared at Drac's group without words. "What's with those stares?" Drac smiled. "If you don't like what I said, come at us." At the side, Mark also retreated, following the man he was talking to. The man also pulled his niece away and hid somewhere safer. What's with the long stare down? Mark voiced out nonchalantly. And that Drac guy, if he wanted to fight, why not attack first? Is he stupid? Boss. Lower your voice. The man beside Mark fearfully warned him while hugging his niece. There's a tacit rule between the gangs to not get involved in fights inside the settlement. If they did, the people backing them and the military will get involved. In that case, the side that attacked first might get punished. Not the one that provoked the fight? Mark asked. Apparently, no, the man replied. They said that verbal provocations don't really cause harm. That is why all they could do was provoke but not attack first. It was a stupid rule. That was what Mark had in mind after hearing that. Furthermore, the members of the Powder Gang were provoking the members of the White Snake Gang inside their territory. Yet, they could not do anything. But all of a sudden, Mark felt a familiar fluctuation. It was not only one, but two at that. The provocation was still ongoing. There were even soldiers in the area now. However, the soldiers did not seem to be taking action to stop the two groups but were just watching at the side as if they were watching a movie shoot. By the looks of it, it seemed that they knew that no fight would start and were just watching for the show. Still, as soldiers, watching idly at the side in this situation sure was a bastardly action. What is going on here? A woman's voice was heard. Finally, the fluctuations Mark felt arrived, and to Mark's surprise. Boss. Husto and his group retracted their stares at Draco's group and greeted the woman that arrived. Tisk. Draco clicked his tongue. Let's go. Without even saying anything to the people that arrived, Draco's group left the place. Of course, they did not leave without giving the woman a sticky look. Still, with the group of bastards leaving, the situation began to return to normal. I'm leaving, Mark said to the man standing beside him. By the way, what's your name? It's Liam, boss. The man introduced himself. Then, here's something for answering my questions. Mark tossed something to Liam, making him catch it frantically. Liam almost missed catching it as the item was heavy and had to bend his body down to the ground. Then, Liam saw that it was actually a large can of tuna, making him nervous. He just answered a few questions anyone here could answer. He did not deserve such a luxury. Boss. I can't accept boss. Liam was confused. The man in front of him was already gone. Lillian. Where's the man with Uncle just now? Liam asked his 9-year-old niece, but to his confusion. I don't know. Lillian replied, hiding a few candies with her closed fists. Leaving the uncle and niece, Mark appeared in the sky once more. Now, he had a proper direction to take with his investigation as he watched the people below. And his next stop would be the base of operations of the White Snake Gang. Day 200 to 9:12 p.m. Meeting area, White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Those drug addicts are getting worse and worse over time. An extremely annoyed voice of a young man echoed inside the room. Are we really not going to make a move against them? Just calm down, will you? A woman's voice argued back. Just going out there and blindly attacking them won't do us any good. The handing out of food for the children continued after the situation caused by the members of the Powder Gang led by Drac. However, everyone's mood soured from then on. The moment that the last bowl of soup was handed out, those in position within the White Snake Gang returned to their base to conduct a meeting. But, of course, no matter what argument they had right now, there was no answer to find. As always, it's because of those politicians. Another voice, a man who was cleaning his gun, spoke. The rule of who attacked first taking the blame was clearly made for their advantage. It was a rather bothersome fact. This rule had been here ever since the gangs began ruling the slums and existed way before the White Snake Gang was founded. It was because even the gangs before were actually backed by high-standing people of the government. Those people behind the gangs did not want to entangle with one another in a bad way. Thus, they prevented their minions from causing them trouble. In the first place, none of those politicians knew who backed the other gangs. They were just afraid that they would end up offending someone with a higher position or manpower and end up losing. The situation with the White Snake Gang was different, however. General Perez did not hide the fact that he was the one backing the newly established gang. It was to ensure that the people from Bay City would know that the White Snake Gang was different from the other existing gangs. It might be a gang, but it was just in name. It was actually a group of people supporting General Perez's cause. A gathering of people that had yet to succumb to the inhumanity of the current world. In fact, it was not named White Snake Gang in the first place. The current name was just given as a deterrent for those who would think that they were just a group of pushovers. After all, names did give the first impression. Unfortunately, that first impression was already beginning to fade. It was because of the other gangs, especially the Powder Gang, trying to push their limits. The harassment itself was not personal, however. The Powder Gang was being ordered to mess with the White Snake Gang for a specific reason. It was because they had General Perez behind them. The backers of the other gangs were unknown. It was only a circumstance that the White Snake Gang had. And since their backer was clear, they were being targeted by the general's enemies. "When will Miguel contact us?" Justo asked the female boss of the gang. "Tomorrow, in the least," the woman replied. "General is also busy inside. He and his men are trying to track who is the backer of those drug addicts, after all. It might also be the reason why the harassment is intensifying." "Just what is Miguel doing?" Justo scratched his head. "He is putting us in a tight spot because he can't find the source of the drugs. Those that deal in the illegal drug business are slippery as eels, after all." The man cleaning his gun chimed in. Dealing with the illegal drug business was just as criminal as it was before the apocalypse. Even more so since the politicians, holed up in Fortress City, were still trying to implement the kind of government the country had in the past. But, of course, it was only within those tall walls. In fact, they did not care much about the things left outside. Even the movements of the military were restricted because of them. They wanted the military to only protect their hides. "So, we're just going to wait?" the young man asked. "Those guys from the Powder Gang are already getting into everyone's nerves." "As I said before, there's nothing else we can do," the woman replied, getting annoyed with the young man. This time, the young man stepped back and went silent. But with the silence of the young man, a voice chimed in all of a sudden. "You guys having a hard time?" Everyone was surprised by the voice that did not belong to anyone inside the meeting area. Currently, there were only the two bosses of the gang, two younger members, Justo, and a pair of armed guards present. As such, they were sure that none of the members had that voice. Nonetheless, some of the people inside the room felt the voice rather familiar. They all turned to the chair that was supposed to be empty. Right now, a person sat there. A man wearing a black hooded jacket with his lower face covered with a face mask. Justo and the two younger members were surprised. They knew this man. This man was the one they talked to this afternoon. The leader of the group that had just arrived in this place today. Of course, the sudden appearance of the man incited almost everyone to raise their weapons. Even Justo, while did not unholster his weapon, his hand was already touching the handle of his machete. However, contrary to the reactions of the rest, dude, the female boss of the gang rushed to the man and jumped at him, not to attack, however. Bam! The man's chair fell as he stood up immediately. He could not help it. After all, if he did not stand up, he might have fallen on his back as the female boss of the gang hugged him tightly. That action left everyone but the man cleaning his gun, the second boss of the gang, flabbergasted. "Karen, there are other people here," the male boss sighed. "Then, everyone but Justo is dismissed," the female boss exclaimed as she peeled herself off the man. With the sudden appearance of an unknown stranger, there was an opposition to leave their bosses alone. But, of course, they could not do anything but leave after they were scolded. "Seriously," the man said as he removed his face mask, "how did you two know it's me?" "Then next time, cover up your eyes too," the female boss said. "Don't be absurd," the man sighed. You're telling me to wear sunglasses in the middle of the night? Husto watched at the side, seeing the unexpected situation. The two bosses of the gang knew the leader of the group that arrived this morning. Furthermore, it was clear that their relationships were rather close. In fact, the female boss had some assets that were gathering her some unwanted attention. One reason why the female boss was careful with interactions with males recently. But here, she was the first to jump and put the man in her embrace. The man was clearly Mark. He was here since the meeting started. He just decided to show himself after hearing the things the members of the gang spoke. And the two leaders of the gang? They were Mark's close friends and classmates during their 4 years in college, Karen and Markren. They were among Mark's friends present in Bay City. They were also two of the few that received crystals to become mutators from Mark. Mark could only sigh with the reason how the two recognized him even when he was wearing a hood and had his face half covered. It was because Mark had a rather unique pair of eyes, which were clearly opposite in terms of shape. His right eye always looked tired and sleepy, while his left could devour someone with a wide-eyed stare. It might not be apparent for those that only saw Mark a few times. However, for those that accompanied Mark for a long time, and years at that, Karen and Markren would easily identify Mark just by his eyes. In any case, Mark looked at Karen. This boyish woman was still the same, not minding giving him hugs. Well, it was not like she was doing the same just with anyone. It was just a select few. Unfortunately, Markren, who had a crush on her in the past, was not one of those. These two were like Mark's older sister and older brother back in their college days. They were several months older than him, after all, with Karen being the eldest, and they were the greatest influence to him in terms of otaku culture. If you are here, then where May and the others? Karen excitedly asked. Did you come here alone? Wait. Markren spoke exasperatedly at Karen. Let's all sit down first, and there is a group that arrived here this morning. It should be Mark's group, right? With Markron's urging, the group finally sat down properly. You two know him? Husto, who finally had the chance to ask. Unexpectedly. Sir Husto, I'm pretty sure you also heard about him, Markren told the bulky man. From General Perez. You heard his name, right? Mark, right? Husto looked at, thinking about something. It took only a second, though. That Mark that fought, Ouroboros, in Bay City? He knew about it, huh? Mark muttered and turned to Karen and Markren. He's not just a lackey within the gang, right? Outside, we are showing that he's under us, Karen replied. But actually, we are equal here in standing. He's even superior to us in many aspects. Well, he's a former soldier, after all. Markren chimed in. And he's actually at the same batch of graduates with General Perez. He's even higher placed than the general. Stop that. Husto could not help but cough in embarrassment with his past being laid in front of a stranger. It's all in the past. I'm nothing but a retired soldier now. By the way, why are you here? Markren asked Mark. I'm pretty sure that you went the East Coast, to Quezon Province. This is completely the opposite side of the country. We just went to check on the situation in Bay City but did not find anyone, Mark replied. We followed the clues and ended up here. Husto at the side found the conversation inconceivable. The only military settlement in the Quezon province was in Real, Quezon from what he knew. From there to Corregidor Island, it was more than 120 kilometers if one was to travel straight, which was impossible unless one traveled on a plane. With the current situation of Earth, it was an impossible journey. Yet, they were saying that this Mark's group came from all the way on the other side of the country? It was really inconceivable. What are they? Ghosts? Anyway, Mark spoke. You guys are having problems with that powder gang? Mark shifted the topic. A reunion between friends might be a good thing to celebrate, but it was not possible with the current situation. Wait, did you see what happened earlier? Husto could not help but ask. When you guys are handing out food for the children, Mark replied. You're the one that told me to go there, right? I'm sure you heard our discussion just now. Markren sighed. Well, that's the situation. If possible, we wanted to deal with them. But those guys are too slippery to deal with. That's right. Karen rubbed her forehead. Fighting inside the settlement is not possible. The only way to deal with them is by ambushing them outside. But not only do their members go outside rarely, but they are slippery to trap. Mark looked at the two. It seemed that they were really used to the current world and would not hesitate to kill to deal with the trouble. Well, Oedicus were the fastest to adapt to this kind of situation. Well, if you two wanted to catch them outside, you should deal with the spies first, you know? Mark voiced out, leading to the other three people in the room making serious faces. We already considered that possibility, but we haven't found any evidence on who is the spy. Markran grimly said. But then, Mark dropped a bomb. I know, though, Mark said. The guy just contacted who seemed to be a messenger outside just now. The messenger is currently moving away from this place. I'm pretty sure they are sending information about me, who appeared out of nowhere. The three looked at Mark, who did not seem to be lying at all. If that was the case, they should stop it. Which direction did the messenger go to? Markran suddenly stood up in a hurry, grabbing his gun, which was his favorite gun in a certain FPS game. Karen seemed to also have a grim expression. Mark could not understand the grim reaction of the two. In any case, he began to give the right direction to Markran. Day 200 to 9:19 p.m. White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. Getting urged by Markran and Karen, Mark followed the two as they made their way to the roof of the base of the White Snake Gang. Then, as Mark pointed the direction, they went to the south watchtower of the compound. Husto followed behind the three, but he did not climb up the watchtower. The watchtower was only built for 1 to 2 people. 3 people atop it were already tight, not to mention 4 right now. One would think why there were watchtowers in a compound near the walls. With the gang having enemies here and there, it was reasonable to have defenses in their base. The guard at the watchtower was surprised to see their bosses climb up in a hurry. Furthermore, there was an unfamiliar person with them. But before the guard could ask what was happening, Mark spoke. It's that guy, the one with the bottle in his hand. Mark pointed the spy to Markran and Karen. The watchtower was right beside the street, and the entire street could be viewed from there. The person Mark pointed at was walking in the middle of the street. He blended in with the survivors he was passing by. He had a bottle in his hand, clearly a bottle of alcohol. Not to mention that the man was walking rigidly as if a bit tipsy from drinking. Of course, that drunk walking was nothing but a ruse. The man was not drunk. It was just an act to fool people. Sir Husto. Follow me. We're going to catch the guy, Karen said as she jumped off the tower. Markran. Stand by first. Good. Markran replied, already aiming her sniper rifle at the target. Mark watched his two friends as they frantically chased after the messenger. It was fine to be serious since they were dealing with spies at the moment. However, there seemed to be a different cause for the reaction of the two. He could really not understand what could be the reason. After all, while he could guess simple things from reading emotions, deep, complex things were far from his reach if he did not have even the slightest clue about it. Karen and Husto jumped over the walls of the compound and ran through the street. The people that saw them were quite surprised. Even if the night was dark, the moon was out. Furthermore, the two were well known in the area. And looking at their actions, something unusual was happening. Of course, it caused quite a commotion. It was impossible not to in this situation. And that commotion definitely alerted the messenger. Seeing two familiar people running in his direction, the messenger lost his composure. He stopped his drunk act and began to run away, showing that this guy was not some professional. Nonetheless, the messenger seemed to be not just some random individual either. He ran fast, as in fast. In the darkness of the night, his figure was hard to trace because of his speed. Unfortunately for the guy, he was panicking, or probably inexperienced. Instead of running across the street and using the people as obstacles, he went to jump onto the roof of a shack, leaving the street and his possible cover. Sir Husto. "I'll be going first," Karen said to Husto as she prepared her legs. And then, she jumped onto the roof of the shack near her. The structure Karen jumped on was not as sturdy as the one the messenger jumped onto. The roof might even crumble if someone else was to jump on it. However, the moment Karen's foot touched the roof, she sprang off to another structure, leaving the shack as if it was untouched. It was the Mutator's ability that Mark gave her. It was one of the Mutator abilities he collected from the criminals of the now destroyed Death Valley settlement. Mark had not given the mutation any specific name due to its nature, and it did not cause any specific change in appearance, either. What the mutation did, however, was mutate the muscles of Karen's lower body. Surely, it sounded weak, considering evolvers could have the same enhancement in their bodies. However, the enhancement that evolvers received had limits. Some evolvers became fast at running, some gained more flexible legs, and there were also those whose kicking power rose sharply. However, evolvers could only have one specific enhancement on their bodies. Karen, on the other hand, gained all those after she received the physical crystal from Mark. In the first place, her lower body was already on the flexible side in the past. Although she would have a hard time doing splits, she had less effort in doing different angles of kicks. Of course, it was lacking power, considering she was not really trained to fight. With Mark giving her that physical crystal, the flexibility, strength, and speed of Karen's lower body were enhanced altogether. Running and jumping from roof to roof, the chase continued. Soon, the fleeing spy would reach the border of the territory of White Snake Gang towards the western slums. However, it was unlikely to happen in the current stage of the chase. Karen was way faster and nimbler than the messenger and would catch up in just a few seconds. And as the messenger feared, as he was just a few steps before reaching the western slums, Karen appeared in front of him. *T. The messenger cursed, pulling out a knife to stab the woman in front of him. Unfortunately for the messenger, even if Karen's feet had just landed unstably on the roof they stood on, her enhanced leg muscles were faster than the speed the messenger pulled out his knife. One kick on the messenger's right wrist caused the knife to fly away, and with a spin, another kick to the messenger's abdomen caused him to fall to the street below. Falling into the street, the man was not inclined to give up. He tried to stand up as fast as he could while holding his painful abdomen. Before he could stand up, however, a shadow loomed behind him. Husto already caught up, just a few steps behind the messenger. "Just surrender if you don't want to get hurt," Karen warned the enemy, but he did not reply. Even so, the messenger was trapped. Karen was in front, and Husto was behind. There was only one way he could escape, and that was to jump onto the roofs once more. And as expected, the messenger did. Taking out several more knives from his body, the messenger threw the knives to Karen and Husto with a spin to distract them. With the delay of the two avoiding the knives, the messenger jumped up high to the roof to his right. The messenger was already smiling. The delay should be more than enough to let him escape to the territory of the other gang. But as the messenger was about to land on the roof, pock, 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 4 sounds of impact were heard after 4 almost inaudible swooshing sounds. The next thing that the messenger knew was his body losing balance, along with the pain in both his legs and hands. He failed his landing on the roof and fell to the ground due to the impact. Blood splattered as he fell, yelling in pain and agony. He was shot and with extreme precision. With the scene of the messenger being shot, the people that witnessed it began to flee the area. They did not know what was happening, but it was better to shut up and leave. Soon, the messenger passed out due to pain and shock, and probably blood loss. "Sir Husto, carry him," Karen ordered. "We should leave the area before those drug addicts sniff out the situation." "Yes, boss," Husto replied, reverting to calling Karen boss because of the people that could hear them. Back at the watchtower, Markran and Mark were already heading down. Of course, those 4 shots were made by no one else but Markran, with the help of his Mutator ability. Among the group of friends that Mark had in the past, Markran was the so-called gun otaku. He was also one of the few people that introduced Mark to FPS gun games. Markron's knowledge and interest in guns were deep. As such, Mark gave him an ability similar to Birds of Prey had. When he was shooting just now, Markron's eyes transformed. However, the transformation was not just an eagle or hawk's eye, either. It was more or less a hybrid, allowing Markron to have a bird of prey's sight, whether it was day or night. Furthermore, Markron was a evolver himself before becoming a mutator. His arms were strengthened by the evolution he underwent. With Markron's abilities as an evolver and mutator combined, along with the practice he could now display such feats, like shooting 4 simultaneous shots with a rotating bolt sniper rifle at pinpoint accuracy. Not to mention that his target was moving pretty fast. These abilities and skills made Markron and Karen known within the slums. It was one of the reasons they were seen as a thorn in the necks by other gangs, especially the Powder Gang. And there was no need to mention that Karen and Markron were just 2 of the mutators within the White Snake Gang. Karen and Husto returned with the bleeding messenger in tow. The unconscious messenger was then put down on the ground inside the compound of the White Snake Gang. The guy was still bleeding, and if this continued, he would die of blood loss. However, Karen, Markron, and Husto did not seem inclined to seek medical treatment for the dog of the enemy. The situation sure caused a commotion, and the members of the gang inside the compound were wakened up and gathered in the vacant area. They all circled the dying messenger, and all of them had ruthless faces after learning the situation. Well, not all of them. All of a sudden, 3 people began to bleed from their noses, eyes, and ears. It only took a few seconds for them to pass out. One of them was the young man that was with Husto's group. "Take these away and lock them up." Karen issued the order to her confused gang members. "These guys are spies working with our enemies." Surely, not everyone believed the sudden accusation. The 3 men that fell unconscious had some close friends within the gang, after all. However, they could not go against the boss's orders and were just satisfied that the state of their friends was unlike the dying man in front of them. Without a doubt, Karen, Markron, and Husto were letting the messenger die. The person might have lived if he surrendered when Karen told him to, but he continued to fight and flee. This was the result of his actions. "Take care of this guy. Make sure that no one sees him." Markron coldly ordered some members. Unlike most of the gang members, these ones seemed to be more experienced in dealing with dirty stuff. After the commotion had been dealt with, the gang members dispersed under the order of their bosses. The only ones left were those that were called by Karen and Markron into the meeting area. Those members were confused why they were called but still followed the 2. Entering the meeting area, those members saw someone they were sure was not a member of their gang. But when they saw his familiar face, their faces lightened up. "Big bro." 2 of the members called out, while the rest called his name. "Mark." Surely, these gang members were surprised but extremely happy to see Mark. Well, Mark was the reason they were all still alive and kicking. If not for Mark, some of them might have died long ago, trapped and sick. Worse, they might have been eaten or turned into infected. And most of all, they managed to pass the calamity safely because of the abilities Mark gave them. Day 201 to 12:05 a.m. Meeting area, White Snake Gang Base, Northern Slums, Corregidor Military Settlement, Island of Corregidor, Province of Cavite. The day had passed, and it was already past midnight. However, illuminated by oil lamps, the meeting area of the White Snake Gang was still bustling with activity. It was not a gang activity, though. Instead, it was a reunion of people that had not met for a long while. The center of attention was, of course, Mark. There was also Miracle sitting on his lap, insisting on staying with him. After the commotion about the messenger that was killed by the combined efforts of Karen, Markron, and Husto, Mark met with the group of friends he had here in the White Snake Gang. They also insisted on making Mark's group stay inside the gang's compound instead of the dilapidated shack they were brought to. And now, it led to this situation. Mark and Miracle were the only ones present in the meeting area. May and the others were told by Mark to rest. After all, even though Mark told them to sleep when he left, none of them did at all. It was reasonable since they did not feel safe here at all. Inside the gang's compound, however, it was different. Knowing that the White Snake Gang was run by Mark's friends, it was easier to rest here than outside. Besides, Mark was also present here. He would know first if there was danger nearby. Karen and the others insist that the rest of Mark's group join them. Only May, Amihan, and the children knew the people present, after all. It would be awkward for Feng Jiruo and Spera to be present on the current occasion. Well, a reunion during the apocalypse sure was an occasion to celebrate. After all, a short separation could mean death, not to mention a long one. Husto left, knowing that the reunion was not the place for him to stay for now. Instead, he headed back to deal with another problem, the spy, who handed the message to the messenger. Who was the spy? It was no other than the young man under Husto's leadership. The very same hot-blooded young man, present during his first meeting with Mark and at the discussion with the bosses of the White Snake Gang. Who would have thought that the young man's hot-bloodedness was just a ploy, an act? In fact, he was doing that action to try and instigate the members of the White Snake Gang to retaliate to the provocations of the members of the Powder Gang. Unfortunately, he was caught tonight because of his hasty nature. He should have waited a little more before sending the information about the weird stranger meeting with their bosses, which would likely be the person the government was looking for. With only Mark and the people he knew present in the room, the reunion went smoother. Karen and Markran aside, there were only 4 more people present. The 2 were Carlo and Charmaine, who was more or less Mark's younger brother and sister. The other 2 were Suzanne, one of Mark's close classmates and friends during college, like Karen and Markran, and her husband, Loretto, who also knew Mark. With all of them present, the first thing to do, of course, was to catch up, sharing stories about the things that happened during their separation. It was an opportunity for Mark to ask questions and the people here answered without problems. Furthermore, the people here owe Mark their lives in one way or another. And it was the current topic of the group. What happened during the calamity, the arrival of the second wave? As said, they owe their lives to Mark in one way or another. One reason was that their survival from the calamity was due to the mutator abilities Mark gave them. When the debris from space fell, and when the earthquake demolished the buildings in Bay City, the abilities they received from Mark saved them. If not for these, they might have died at that time. After all, everything happened all of a sudden and without warning. No regular human could be able to react to that situation at all. Those humans could only stare above as the buildings collapsed onto them. Karen was even inside a collapsing building at that time. Her nimble legs from her mutation allowed her not only to save her life but also her son's. Unfortunately, though, they could only save themselves. Karen and the others were incapable of helping other people at that time. Many died in front of them. The catastrophe ended, leaving only a third of Bay City military settlement's population behind. Before that day, the population of Bay City military settlement was around 12,000 people, with the military able to rescue survivors from outside from time to time. But as that day ended, only around 4,000 people or less were left alive. However, many were severely injured, with some trapped under the collapsed buildings. The death toll still increased after a few days. In the end, only around 3,000 people were left in the ruined Bay City. Of course, it did not mean that the number of deaths stagnated. Since the world changed and the moat east of Bay City was covered in new ground, the remnants of the military had to fight day and night. The survivors also helped, carrying the debris of destroyed buildings to create a wall. Even so, 1 or more people would die every day due to the relentless attacks of the infected. Not to mention the robots that appeared. Although they were unable to enter the premises of Bay City due to the invisible barrier that who knows where it came from, the robots fired lasers from afar, killing any unlucky person to get hit. It would have been fine if those robots could be dealt with the same way as the infected. However, many of those robots could endure a barrage of bullets and could only be destroyed by heavy weaponry and explosives. Because of the robots, gathering supplies from outside were cut off. Even though the military managed to salvage equipment to deal with the radiation, they could not do anything but stay within the barrier. The lower district was abandoned, and all the survivors moved to the upper district at that point. There was no use in using the lower district, considering the fewer population surviving and the bridge connecting the two districts destroyed by the earthquake. But the problems listed above were not the rest of it. 2 weeks after the catastrophe, Nia and Alan, Professor Isaac's assistants and adopted children, began to claim something unbelievable. They said that the settlement was being enveloped by a dangerous kind of energy. Of course, no one believed them initially. Then, some of the survivors, even soldiers, exhibited odd behaviors and states. Nightmares were the start of it. Some became irritant and had unstable emotions. Some even began hearing whispers in their ears. Even for the doctors, while it could be ruled as trauma from the current events, it was still odd for many people to exhibit the same symptoms. Not to mention at the same time. Furthermore, those involved in retrieval operations for supplies and equipment in the lower district were more susceptible to the symptoms. And the symptoms became worse and worse. It was then that a group of soldiers not from Bay City Military Settlement arrived. They were elite soldiers from Corregidor Military Settlement, moving under the president's orders. Those elite soldiers sent the message about the president telling survivors of military settlements to gather in Corregidor Island. It became the main reason for General Perez and the other officers deciding to abandon the Bay City Military Settlement. There was some opposition at first. It was mainly from the politicians and businessmen that survived. After all, the journey there would be fraught with dangers. They insisted on staying within the barrier that protected them from the robots. The opposition did not last, though. General Perez declared that leaving the settlement was voluntary. It meant that those who wanted to leave could leave, and those that wanted to stay could stay behind. The majority of the people wanted to leave and hope for the best. Those that wanted to stay saw that and ended up joining in the end. While they could stay by themselves, there was no point if they could not protect themselves from the infected, because no soldier wanted to stay behind. In the end, they embarked on the arduous journey even before the radiation completely vanished. The journey that would only take a few hours in the past ended up going for days. They had to cut the grass and trees on the path of the repaired vehicles. Not to mention fighting the infected, feral, evolved creatures, and even the robots along the way. A lot of people died during the long journey. The around 2,500 people that left the ruins of Bay City lost even more people. After a few days of an arduous journey, the remaining less than 2,000 people reached Corregidor Military Settlement. When they arrived, the fortress city, named the Government Safe Zone, was still in its early stages of construction. Nonetheless, the walls were already built. They could not help but wonder how they made the walls quickly and rebuilt the ruins after the catastrophe. Many were dismayed during their arrival. After all, not everyone could enjoy the safety of the walls. It was only a selected number of people, ones with skills, status, and strength, who were given the opportunity to live inside the walls. Nonetheless, it was way better living here than the ruins of Bay City they left behind. Here, the fighting was limited due to the defensible terrain. It was unlike the ruins of Bay City, where they had to fight day and night. There were also more sources of food here than in the middle of the city. Back in Bay City, the people could only rely on the military for food and water. Although fishing in Manila Bay was also plausible, the catch was not enough there than here. Hearing what happened, Mark nodded in understanding. He saw the state of the ruins before reaching this place. It was uninhabitable. There was no need to mention the gathering of negative energy which Nia and Alan detected. It was no surprise, too, that they did. Both of them were inheritors of the Psycasts, after all. If the people of Bay City stayed longer, it might have ended with the formless demon being born earlier. It was because those affected by the negative energy would definitely end up contributing more to it, accelerating the demon's birth. This would definitely cause more trouble. And possibly, death of everyone that was still alive in Bay City. Now that Mark learned what happened in Bay City the whole month after the second wave, one question was left in Mark's mind. It was the strange reaction of Karen and Markran when they heard that a spy sent something to the messenger, something that could possibly pertain to his arrival. Karen, Markran, I have a question. Mark asked his two friends. Don't ask. Karen shrugged. It's about our reactions to that spy, right? It's pretty obvious that you noticed. At this point, not only Karen and Markran but even the rest present in the room. They all looked at Mark with difficult expressions. That expression sure baffled Mark. Was there something wrong with him? Seriously. It's good that you came with a disguise, and there are only a few people that saw you appear here. Markran sighed. Big bro, Carlo spoke. You should stay hidden here. If you want to go out, always wear a disguise. Cover your face or something. Also, don't interact with us outside if possible. Seriously. Out with it. Mark pressed on. All right, don't get angry. Karen spoke. You are currently wanted by the government.